You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Starting in February, KUOW journalist Isolde Raftery has taken us back in time to Seattle's Garfield High School 26 years ago. In her podcast, Adults in the Room, she tells listeners about a rumor about a teacher named Tom Hudson. The rumor was that Hudson was sexually abusing a student. Mr. Hudson was a popular teacher at Garfield. He taught biology and led Post 84, a student outdoors program. And at the time, Isolde and her best friend Ella Hushagen reported the rumor of the alleged abuse for the Garfield student newspaper. And just a few months after that news broke, Mr. Hudson died by suicide. Hudson was memorialized in glowing terms by the students he mentored. Allegations about his behavior remained unresolved, and some in the Garfield community questioned whether the student journalists, Isolde and Ella, had recklessly driven an innocent man to his death.
Our friends, parents, teachers, even a columnist at Seattle's biggest newspaper called us gossips, rumor mongers, character assassins. Our high school turned on us and made us pariahs. And those abuse allegations against our teacher, they were never proven.
Decades later, they wanted to know what really happened. So Isolde and Ella started to investigate. That investigation turned into a so far 7-episode podcast called Adults in the Room. And that 7th episode is out now. The podcast is a hit. A lot of people listening. So I wanted to have Isolde back on the show. Isolde Raftery, host of Adults in the Room. Thank you so much for being here and agreeing to kind of talk about the ways that the show is being received and what's happened since you started having those episodes out in the world. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, really quick, 2 disclaimers for listeners. This will contain some spoilers for the show. So if you haven't listened to 7 episodes of Adults in the Room, go listen to that first and maybe, click away for a little bit. This conversation will also mention the sexual abuse of minors, which is the topic of Adults in the Room. Adults in the Room so far is, really what I would say is a hit show. It's gotten more than 1 million downloads. It's been trending on Apple Podcasts. And Isolde, I think the first thing I want to know from you is, what have you heard from Tom Hudson's victims, the men who spoke to you for the show, about how the show has impacted them? Just the fact that it's in people's ears now and people are talking about it. How are they doing with all of this?
I have been in touch with the 3 who are in the podcast, and they're doing great. I'm in touch with one all the time and the other 2 pretty often. And I would say that because the podcast has taken quite a while to air, we've been in conversation for a really long time, and having it out there, there's sort of a ripping off of the Band-Aid. But what has been incredibly cool for them is that a lot of people are coming out and heralding them as being very brave for sharing their story, which they are. And they're getting a lot of love from the people around them. So I think a lot of this, they felt very alone and isolated, even as they were talking to me. And now I think they feel really, really good about what they did. They spoke with me because they wanted to do social good. They hoped that in sharing their story, other people might share their stories that would create change, social change, less likely for pedophiles to be able to prey on kids. And so I think they're feeling good about that.
Yeah. The conversations that it started for me and my circles, a lot of it has to do with the grooming process and things that you might not think of as grooming. Something that really jumps out to me is the way that Tom Hudson would pretend that this was like a mentorship process to push somebody's boundaries, to really push them to the limit and see how far they would go. But in fact, what you are describing is the way that he's laying the groundwork to push personal boundaries in sexual and predatory ways. And I wonder if that is something that you're also hearing from listeners of the podcast, is just illuminating sort of the steps that a predator can take to violate a young person.
I've heard from hundreds of people. I mean, I'm not even kidding. People who are sharing their personal stories. A subsection among those people getting in touch with me are people who feel they dodged a bullet with Tom Hudson. So they are men who were in post-84 early days, who felt like he really took a shine to them. And for whatever reason, they fell out with him. They didn't want to continue doing outdoor programming. Maybe they felt uncomfortable and they just took a step back. And what they've all shared is how angry he was with them for it. They didn't think about it much until listening to Adults in the Room, and they've been like, oh my God, that could have been me. And that's a weird feeling to realize, like, you could have gone down a different, much more dark path.
Basically, he seemed like he was spurned. Like
Yes.
The fact that they wouldn't allow certain things to happen, or they had, decided that these were the lines that Hudson couldn't cross, he would then get very angry, is what they are telling you.
And often they, in Adults in the Room, episode 1, I am beckoned to Tom Hudson's office, and he really gives me a dressing down. I really assumed, I don't know why, that I was probably the only person who ever experienced that. Many of these boys told me they were called to his office and told like what bad people they were and how they had violated XYZ, rule that they hadn't violated. Like they were very confused by this. And they realized it was him kind of casting them out. I don't really know, but they, it stayed with them. So yeah.
What has it been like to see the reach of the podcast, and what has stuck out to you? We've talked a little bit about the reaction so far from listeners, but what has stuck out to you about the conversations that it's started?
I'll tell you one story. There's a woman who got in touch with me and said that her science teacher sexually assaulted her. And I said, well, is he still teaching? Is there a world in which he might still be teaching? And she found out that, yes, he was. And she filed a formal complaint. We're talking decades later. And that there's an investigation underway. That is a small little moment. But what I'm seeing is people who write to me and go, I've heard about this one person. And I'm like, okay, this is how you're going to file for public records. And so we have a lot more people filing public records. I actually want to do a little...
To get like the disciplinary records of a teacher to see if they've been investigated, basically. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so I'm seeing a lot of that happening, and a lot of people suddenly realizing that things aren't quite right. I mean, it's almost like I feel like the lens shifted, or like something pivoted for people where they realized something hadn't sat well with them, and all of a sudden they realized, wait a minute, I think that may have been abuse.
I understand that as these episodes were coming out, you were hearing more about Tom Hudson, and you just described how some listeners had shared what they saw now as close calls, now that things were recontextualized from their childhood memories to like what they know today from your reporting. What kinds of things about the Hudson case or about Garfield High School came forward that you're able to talk about at this point while the show was airing, and how did that affect the direction of the show?
Right. So I think, as I told you before we started recording, there are certain things I cannot yet share. But what I learned from people, and going back to the 1950s, was that Tom Hudson was involved in the Boy Scouts, and he was a troop leader. And I mean, I had one man tell me that Tom Hudson, as an older teenager, had an 11-year-old boy sleeping in his space. Who knows what happened? But that, listening to the podcast, he went like, yeah, that never was normal seeming to me, and now I'm wondering about it. I heard about Tom Hudson humiliating kids, shaming kids who couldn't make it on a hike. So in one case, I mean, back in the 60s, he walked behind a kid, shoving, the blunt part of an ice axe in his back up the mountain until the kid couldn't do it anymore, and he just burst into tears. And the guy who told me had been on this hike and said he saw the cruelty of it, and it has stayed with him forever, just how cruel that was. So those are like tiny little details. And I've heard from people who knew him well, who feel a lot of guilt and feel like they knew something was amiss, and they regret not not going to authorities. But, what I've said to them is he was a master manipulator. He was very, very good at grooming not just children, but their families, which is the playbook, by the way. You don't just groom the kids. You make everybody feel like you're this superstar and that the world would be dimmer without you. And so a lot of those people, I'm like, well, what would you have reported? Like, you got a bad vibe? You can't report that. So that's what a lot, and when I say a lot, I would say probably 5 adults have come to me and said, I was so close to him. I could have done something. I didn't. I feel regret. So yeah, that's been a theme.
In the 7th episode, we hear the voice of Cheryl Chow. And I think, one of the things that we've talked about is the way that the title Adults in the Room for this podcast is really ironic, because indeed there weren't any adults that were protecting these kids at the time, or the adults that were trying to protect these kids were overwhelmed by the adults who were actively looking the other way, who kind of circled the wagons for Hudson, or who kind of kept their heads down and didn't want to make waves. But Cheryl Chow seems like she is one of the bright spots in terms of trying to get accountability at the time. She's not alive anymore. She's from this like very well-known family in Seattle history, and she's a former city council member. She was the principal that was brought in to Garfield High School while you were there. What was it like to hear that Cheryl Chow tape, and what did it kind of tell you about how the adults at the time were reacting to this case?
I think we should share how I got that tape.
Do you want to share how we got that tape?
I think you should share how we got that tape.
I feel kind of embarrassed because I'm like,
why don't you
self-serving.
Share it? You should share it. It's like really remarkable.
It is. So Isolde and her team got that tape because of a chance meeting that I had at a wedding with Tim Matsui, the documentary filmmaker and outdoors, person. And he was at this wedding, and I started a conversation with him about podcasting. And at one point, he sort of asked what was going on at KUOW. And I said, well, we've got a really full slate of podcast projects going on. And one of them, I can't say much, but it's about a teacher at Garfield High School and some alleged misconduct. And Tim Matsui, with just that amount of information, says to me, is it about Tom Hudson? And I just felt like chills go down my back because he immediately just guessed what I was talking about. And then the connection went from there, that he had worked with Post 84 and had interviewed Cheryl Chow in the early 2000s about this case before she died. And so that was just a chance encounter that led to you being able to kind of listen back and learn more about the case. Did other things like that happen in the course of your reporting? I mean, that just seemed like a very, I don't want to say like mystical, but it just felt so like the kismet of it.
Yes. Yeah. It felt, now granted, this was over 6 years. So when you put out to the world, you're working on a project, as things show up in people's basements, they're like, do you want it? So people were giving me Old Messengers, which is the student newspaper. But really the most special, apart from the Cheryl Chow tape, was my friend Maria Coriel Martin texted me and was like, hey, my father-in-law was cleaning out his basement and he found a tape from the memorial service. Do you want it? And I lost my mind. I was like, yes, I'll come get it right now. She actually mailed it right away. And it was really special because we got to hear these kids in a private, small memorial service in a real moment of grief, sharing how much they missed this man who was their mentor and leader.
Yeah. But things just happened that way.
Things happen
in the course of, once you start digging and sort of disturbing and the ripples kind of go out, disturbing the sediment on this, then you never know what you unleash, right?
Yeah, we got really pretty lucky that way. You asked about how I reacted to the Cheryl Chow tape. My feeling about Cheryl Chow in high school was I was very wary of her. I didn't know much about her position. I knew she was protecting us students, but I didn't trust any of the adults. And I hadn't known her long. At this point, I had known her just a few months. So I don't know. I didn't know where she stood. Was she acting fast enough? In general, it was sort of like the jury was out for me on Cheryl Chow. And she wasn't particularly well liked by the teachers, and that came through. So I didn't know what to think of her. Fast forward to listening to that tape, and it was so modern sounding. It was so like she could have said it all today. And I thought, this woman is really trying to protect kids. And for her, she believes in protecting kids far more than protecting teachers. And I don't hear many administrators or school district leaders talking like that or ever. So it was very special. And I realized how kind of wrong I had been. Not wrong on purpose wrong, but it told me a new story. And I've actually spoken to other people who heard that episode who were like, God, I didn't even like her in high school, but whoa, she was pretty rad. It was really nice. And her, one of her very close friends told me that she feels like she's been vindicated because of this series.
Wow.
She ultimately was pushed out of Garfield and left education. And her widow has told me, the Garfield years really broke her. So it was really hard on her too.
Yeah. People who try to make change are often unpopular, right? People who come in and try to break up a culture, even if that culture is toxic and, harming people, they're going to be unpopular at the time. Isolde, for the longest time, the premise of the show, and what you experienced is that your allegations, you told your mom about the Tom Hudson rumor, and then your mom is like, we have to report this, and then you go forward with the reporting. You think that is the reason he goes under investigation and ultimately could be the reason that he takes his own life, that he dies by suicide. And there is guilt heaped on your head. All of this is just what I would call traumatic for two young teenage girls, you and Ella, having to go through this and think that you're responsible for this. But in the course of the reporting, you find out that there was a prior investigation into Hudson over the 1994 skinny dipping photo with students. And then you also find out that, another student had told an investigator contemporary to your concerns a full month prior about concerns about Hudson, about allegations about Hudson. So in fact, what you had carried for all those years, you didn't have to carry it. And I know you talked about it in the show, but I just wonder how the revelation of that has changed you.
Yeah, there is something kind of funny about it in that I realized, wait, I was a bit player. And in fact, at one point I wondered, can I even do this podcast? Because apparently I was just one voice among many bringing concerns about Tom Hudson. And by the way, I've since learned another teacher, a student teacher, brought concerns about Mr. Hudson and reported it to the district about a month or 2 months before I did. So we're really talking about there was a whole choir of people being like, this teacher is bad news. Somebody do something about it. And then nobody was until it was a tonnage issue. And they finally were like, okay, I guess enough people are complaining. I felt immense relief at first. And then you realize it's bittersweet, right? Because in your brain, you're going, oh, thank God. And actually, I had just met my producer, Alec Cowan, and I really didn't know him well. And I learned all this with him, and I was just bouncing around. Literally like a kid at Christmas. I was giddy. And I think that probably it lasted a few hours. And then it was like, this means there were real victims. It was bad. All of a sudden you go, and how bad? And now that's what I have to find out.
So, and there were so many chances to stop it.
So many chances
that didn't happen.
And I also started learning so many people thought they were to blame for his death, and they have all carried that for many, many years. So everybody, I mean, I spoke with the student teacher. I don't think he felt much guilt, but like, he was like, oh, I thought I was the one who, I mean, here we are all in our own little silos thinking that we are to blame. And for the teenagers who are now adults, we did carry that with us. I think that the podcast hopefully relieved a lot of that for people. I know that it brought a lot of community for people. So people are talking and they're talking with each other. And it's been very hard for some people, like extremely emotionally difficult. Some people are only reading the transcript.
Because they don't want to actually hear the voices.
They don't want to hear the voices because it's more impactful to hear the sound.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was freeing in a way, and then absolutely horrible as soon as I started finding out what had actually happened. You can't really rejoice in like, oh, it turns out I was right. Because if you're right, it meant that something really terrible happened. So really the best outcome would have been to find out that I had stirred up rumors and this man was just fantastic. And that was it. That would be the best outcome. But unfortunately, it was not.
Your interview with the current Seattle Public Schools Superintendent, Ben Schuldener, really struck me. He's, of course, really new on the job. He just moved here recently. In fact, when he came on the job, I had just interviewed him when he was still in Michigan in January, and he was just about to get on a plane to come to Seattle. And so you were finally able to sit down with him to talk about this. And I think the result of that conversation is both like he was more candid than maybe you expected. This is as a listener from what I heard, but you also came away pretty frustrated. And I wonder if you could just share, your feelings about that.
So I found him very refreshing. He told me how his hands are tied. And he said he was frustrated.
In terms of going after an allegation of abuse and the risks of the amount of liability for the district if they get it wrong, and the protections of unions and everything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I presented Ben Schuldener with an example. I said, Teacher A has groped a student, groped her thigh, and he is then put on leave. Unpaid leave. He does it again. Should he stay or should he be fired? Me personally, I think the guy should have been shown the door the first time. But by the second time, why does he get to stay? And Schuldener responded by describing something he called the matrix of discipline, that you start with a smaller discipline, kind of like you do in the courts. Like the sentencing guidelines are linked to how many strikes you have. Now, I have actually spoken to prosecutors about this, and they're very frustrated because they feel that school districts don't apply professional standards. They try to apply legal standards, like they're a court of law, but they're not. You can get rid of those people. They don't need to be around children.
Yeah, firing somebody in theory should be a lot easier than convicting them in a criminal court.
Exactly. So they don't seem to see the difference. And I have heard this from a lot. I covered education. I've heard it from a lot of school district leaders that it's just so hard to get rid of a teacher. And I guess I would say, like, didn't we create those systems? So doesn't that mean we can fix the systems? And that's my challenge, because I think when someone says, oh, my hands are tied, and it's at the expense of the children, I think that's the wrong math. And I guess I wish someone would say that's bad math.
I'll just say legal liability hangs over all of this, right? And, and it's an issue we're going to have to return to in the future. Because I also question, like, why the fear of legal liability is so much greater in service of protecting teachers rather than the liability later for, potentially allowing harms to students. But again, let's put a pin in that. Before we go, Isolde, can you just kind of give us a sense that the Adults in the Room project is not over by a long shot? I know that you can't share everything about what's coming up, but we can say that there will be new episodes. Is that right? Of Adults in the Room? What's happening in the future for the show?
I believe there will definitely be one additional episode and likely 2 more. And we need a little bit of a break because we are tired. We worked really hard on this. They are really crucial episodes, which is why we've decided to go forth with them. And I think after that, we'll be done. I say we'll be done.
Yeah, and you never know what comes in your inbox or walks through the door next. But I just want to say I'm so proud to be your colleague and proud of your whole team. You guys have done incredible work.
It's a really good team.
I know
I'm the one who gets interviewed, but the
whole team. Yeah,
there's a whole team behind hosts.
Yeah,
yeah.
You're a pretty key part of it, but yes, there is a whole team. And Isolde, I'm really happy to get to chat with you about Adults in the Room. Thank you
so much, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.